Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third panel debate in 2021 of Pepper Presents. In this session, we are going to look at what's next for the buy-to-let market in 2021. There is no doubt that Brexit, COVID, and the stamp duty holiday are a host of factors set to influence the buy-to-let market this year. But what are the growth areas that brokers should be looking at this year to set themselves apart from other advisors and to help more landlords succeed? So with that in mind, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome three industry buy-to-let experts: Liz Syms, CEO of Connect for Intermediaries; Kris Corns, Operations Director for Crystal Specialist Finance; and James Simpson, Managing Director for TBMC. Thank you guys for joining us today. Really do appreciate it. So starting with you, Liz, are there any growth areas within the buy-to-let market that brokers should be taking a closer look at this year?
Are there any growth areas? I mean, it's a really interesting question. I think there are a couple of areas that we can probably anticipate. One of those will be around perhaps adverse credit, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, people perhaps not having as much income coming in, particularly the self-employed maybe being affected more. We might have, some situations where clients have had a few late payments and so on. So for advisors who kind of brush up on their knowledge of the lenders that can accommodate adverse credit buy-to-let, I think is really, really important. It's good to see, lenders coming out that, with products that can accommodate that. I think also, I can't remember the statistic or where the statistic comes from, but I think it's the highest number of people have, taken on new self-employed positions. So, that would give you an indication on there's going to be people with just 1 year's accounts and things like that floating about in the not too distant future that we may be needing to accommodate, or either looking at lenders with 1 year's accounts or lenders with no minimum income. Those are the sorts of things that we perhaps need to look at. And on a personal perspective, I think holiday lets is another area, because there's still going to be that hesitancy of people to go and holiday abroad in a number of cases. So people with existing holiday lets are perhaps going to see a bit of a boom, and maybe that will encourage more people to actually have holiday letting as a business type. There are other benefits to that as well in terms of things like taxation and the PRA calculations and things like that. So I think those would be my top three areas of growth for advisors to kind of really, gen up on what lenders are doing.
Yeah, I completely agree. What about you, Jane? What are your thoughts?
So about 5 years ago was the birth, if you like, of the 5-year fixed. So I think that brokers need to think about that, the retention and possible rebrokering of those will start to come through. So brokers will have missed those 2 and 3 year rates churning over in the last couple of years, but that should start to come through. So I think that's an area they should be looking at. Going back, on their previous book and looking to see who they started to sell those 5-year fixed to that they've got coming through. I think limited company, when we talk about it a lot, but there are still signs that it's a growing marketplace, and I think now particularly complex limited company structures, so landlords looking at unusual ways to get properties from personal name into their limited company. So getting to understand that, I think, is something that a broker can do well if they understand what lenders will accept and what methods they can use to get those properties over. I think that's a real feather in someone's cap. And I guess property type wise, we might start seeing different types of properties coming through. There's been a lot of talk of people working from home on a more permanent basis, so people perhaps looking for properties that have got that spare room or have got that garden or balcony where they've got a little bit more room if they are doing that kind of live work from home. So possibly those areas, I think.
Gosh, lots of opportunities, aren't there? Kris, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think the ones that have been put forward are certainly excellent, and brokers should be looking at those. We're seeing a growth in conversions as well. So with the change, maybe the high street, for example, there's now a lot of changes from pubs or from retail stores. Converting those into residential, we're seeing is quite a big area at the moment, especially for experienced landlords that are looking to change the type of property and add that to their portfolio. it's certainly a positive time to be looking at the sector, and I think all the indicators are that there'll be certainly a boom towards the end of the year as well.
No, completely agree. So, Jane, if I go to you, so what do you think is potentially affecting a landlord's confidence when it comes to purchasing more properties?
I think at the moment we're not seeing a huge decrease in that. Obviously, we had the stamp duty incentive that went through, so we actually saw a big boost in purchases coming through. That tailed off January, February, with obviously the deadline approaching. But again, now we're starting to see some more activity in that area. I think areas that could potentially be stopping people are obviously, you know, we've got the buzzword about the new normal, but nobody really knows what that is and how that might affect landlords, how it might affect their tenants, and how I think one worry is potentially what tax implications might that mean for them. Obviously, the government have spent a lot of money with the furlough schemes and the different schemes, and in one way or another, that money will get reaped back. So I think a lot of landlords are slightly hesitant as to whether or not their taxes will change. So that might be something in the back of their mind, I think, and probably linked with a potential drop in house value. I think that's been something that's been in the media recently, and it's, you know, do they want to buy a property now and potentially lose a little bit of value on it, or do they want to wait and see if they can pick it up cheaper? So again, I think that's probably something that that they're thinking about at the moment.
I mean, Liz, do you actually think that a landlord's confidence has actually been impacted?
I think it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? You know, it's been so many years now that, you know, landlords have had one thing after another to deal with. So, you know, can it impact their confidence anymore? Or are those just like, oh, here's another thing? I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, from sort of sitting aside the letting agents, one of the things I'm hearing from them is the tenant eviction ban, and that keeps getting extended, you know, that being quite problematic, because if you do have a situation where you've got a tenant that, you know, even tenants that weren't paying before the pandemic lockdown and they were just starting to go through the process, now potentially have been in the property for a year, and you know, a landlord has still got a problem. So I definitely think that's one area that is a problem for landlords. I think the just like Jane said, really, I think it's the fear of the unknown. It's the kind of, you know, what might happen next, what other regulation might be around the corner. That might just be making some landlords still a little bit hesitant, still sort of sitting on the fence to see. But we're not seeing lots of landlords disappearing in droves like was, you know, originally predicted, and that's still not happening. And in fact, you know, stamp duty has really boosted those landlords with good confidence to go ahead and carry on buying and take opportunities from the market as they currently stand.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Kris, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think we're certainly in an artificial market at the moment. No one knows where it's going to end up and what's going to happen in even 3 months' time, let alone 6 months. We've certainly seen an increase in purchases, so there's no indication to show that landlord confidence is dropping. But I think that would depend on the type of landlord that you're dealing with. If buy-to-let income is your main source of income, or it's a business that you're running, then there's still opportunities out there and people are still going ahead and buying them. Maybe if you're trying to get into this for the first time, then maybe it's those landlords that might be thinking twice or looking at what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, no, completely agree. So Joan, going back to you, to what extent do you think the buy-to-let market is being impacted by recent tax and legislation changes?
Which ones?
I know, which ones? I know.
Many. Well, obviously we've got the recent increase to the corporation tax that was announced in the budget. So I think, you know, that's probably start there. That's going to go from 19 to 25%, and I think that's likely to hit the larger landlords. So, I mean, we're yet to see what effect that will have on the landlords themselves and what they do, but that is something that's a new one that's coming into play. I think tax changes, obviously, we've been talking about tax changes, it feels like, for the last, I don't know, how long has it been now? So it's been forever. But yeah, I think what we did see was those dinner party landlords kind of exit the marketplace. However, what we are starting to see is through COVID and people not being able to go anywhere and not being able to go on their holidays and actually saving money, we are actually starting to see some of those landlords coming back in now. So, you know, they've sat at home for a year and they've not been on their on their fancy holidays and they're high earners and they've got this cash, and now they're thinking, actually, I think I'm going to invest this in bricks and mortar again. So I think that's almost come full circle, and we'll see where we end up with that. Obviously, we've talked about stamp duty, which has been a real positive, and I think that's brought, again, new landlords in, and it's enabled some landlords to build on their portfolio, and that's good for the long term of buy-to-let, because, you know, once those landlords have got properties, then, you know, they're in the marketplace. So some negative changes, but I think, as Liz said earlier, I think with buy-to-let, landlords are so used to having these things thrown at them that, you know, those that are in it are just in it now, and they just find a way to get through it.
Yeah. Well, I know IMLA predicted this year, for example, that the market's going to be as big as 41 billion. So, you know, and it's a constantly growing one, I would foresee. Kris, anything to add on that? Would you say that the buy-to-let market is being impacted by taxation changes?
Yeah, as Jane said, we've talked about taxation changes now for a number of years, and there was a big hoo-ha about people moving into limited companies, and people expected that to be a big change, which doesn't seem to have gone the way that I think a lot of people expected it to. But it's still relatively early days from a financial point of view on there. So it's still, the mortgage interest relief is still trickling through when landlords are filing their tax returns. So I think we'll start to see that more as we move through the next few years. But following on from something that Liz touched on, for me, I think the evictions is probably a bigger issue for them. We were talking to a landlord a couple of days ago that had to pay £35,000 to evict a tenant, and that tenant should have only been paying £900 a month. So I think now we'll start to see landlords much more diligently vetting the tenants that are coming in, and maybe taking a bit more care about who they're putting in, rather than just letting them to the first person that turns up.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really valid point. Liz, anything from you?
Not a great deal further to add to that, but just touching on Jane's point in terms of the increase in corporation tax. I mean, the first time that was announced, you thought, oh my God, you know, that's going to affect a lot of landlords. But actually, I think it will probably affect very few, because of the it's only going to be the I think it's £250,000 worth of profit before you're kind of at the 25 or 24% rate.
Oh, right.
There may be the odd landlord making that, but as we know, with most landlords, they try and keep their profits to an absolute minimum, and certainly the tax changes have helped some of those in the high rate tax bracket do that. So hopefully that bit of it is a bit of a red herring and won't actually affect too many people at all. I think Kris is right. You know, we've had an embedding in of those tax changes for the last few years now. So any landlords that needed to do anything different with their strategies, whether it be buying through a limited company, whether it, you know, move to HMOs or holiday letting or commercial, you know, they've probably already implemented most of that now, and I'd be surprised to see any sort of further knee jerks from landlords, you know, just because we're in that kind of final phase of it. So
yeah. Wow, interesting. I'm learning a lot from you three, so this is great. Thank you. Okay, so there's been talk about, obviously, rental yields being affected by regional tenant demand. Do you expect to see wider variances post-lockdown across the country? And do you think there's going to be any regions that flourish? Kris, I'll start with you, if I may, please.
Yeah, I think a lot of this will come down to what the new normal, if you want to use that phrase, looks like, as to what tenant demand will be. Because again, there's been talk of demand for outdoor space, gardens. Jane touched on additional rooms at home. So that might change the type of properties that people are looking for. And also with the rise from working from home, will that mean that people might not necessarily need to be in city centres anymore? So again, there's still a few things to settle on that basis. There was a recent survey where Manchester came out as the number one city tracker for buy-to-let in 2021, using rent, yield, house price return, etc. So I think there's still, London was number 3 on that list, and then you've still got Oxford, Cambridge, Brighton, etc. So there's no predicted change, I suppose, to where we were previously on that. But I think it might just be the property type that might have a bit of an impact on buy-to-let portfolios.
That's really interesting. Liz, what are your thoughts?
I certainly think the pandemic has given lots of people food for thought in terms of quality of life, and working from home and being with the family and so on. And it's also shown a lot of people how easy it is to work remotely. So we've seen an influx of people then say, okay, well, I can still be living over here. I don't have to go and live in London to work. I can be living remotely in Manchester and still work for a company in London, and that all works. So that there could be impacts to demand in areas, particularly city areas, for that reason. But actually, I think it will be less of an impact than we think. And the reason why I think that is that my experience is that people actually think it's going to be great working from home, but actually we're all getting a bit tired of working from home, and actually we still want that balance, but maybe we want to be 2 or 3 days in the office and a couple of days at home, in which case the office has still got to be within a reasonable location and distance wise for you to be able to travel. So you might travel an hour and a half if you're only going in a couple of days a week, but you're certainly not going to do 3 or 4 hours. So again, I think, that's going to change the dynamics a little bit. I don't think everybody's going to vacate and not rent in the city centres, but maybe some of the areas just a bit further out will become a little bit more popular for reasons around that.
Yeah, no, agree. Jane, anything further on that?
I agree with what both the guys have said. I think the only thing that I would add is we have had a few calls from landlords who are in the student-let world, and they're slightly concerned about what that will look like. So, a lot of the universities now are doing 100% learning from home. Obviously there will be a certain amount of students that want to go back to that student life, but maybe the older student, the more mature student, would it be better for them to do a lot of their learning remotely, and will there be less of a need for those properties in some of the student cities? So, I guess it's all the unknown at the moment, but that seems to be, we've had quite a few calls on that, so that seems to be an area of worry for some of our landlords.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. So just one final question. Are there any tips for brokers who are looking to expand their offering into the buy-to-let space? Jane, let's go with you.
All I would say is that buy-to-let is extremely complicated, and I think an in-depth knowledge of lenders' criteria is a must to operate properly in the sector. It is quite different to other areas of the market. Sometimes terminology is different. So if you are going to go into that sector, I think you really need to know your stuff. You need to know the problems that landlords are facing, the lenders that are there, and the criteria in quite a lot of depth, really. There's plenty of opportunity. There's lots of lenders, and I think it's almost impossible to not be able to place a case these days, but you have to know who's going to do it, and you have to have that knowledge there. So just knowledge is key, really.
No, great. Liz, any tips from you?
Yeah, I mean, I can't echo enough what Jane has said with regards to having your kind of real in-depth of options, but also expanding that beyond, just pure buy-to-let. It's what are those fringes in terms of, commercial, in terms of bridging, because your property investors are going to need all of those kind of different solutions to really, really grow and understand the complexities for people like sort of, expats and foreign nationals buying, or offshore trusts and things like that. Because if you get involved in this market, you will get the weird and wonderful, and most of it can be placeable, but only if you've spent the time investing in the knowledge, and the knowledge being a market knowledge in terms of how things work, but also the lender criteria and the detail about that. And if you can do that, working with a property investor is fantastic. Instead of, particularly a portfolio landlord, instead of doing one mortgage for a client every 5 years, you're going to do a mortgage for them every 5 months, and you become their financial partner, in their business. So it's really, really good, good business to be in, and really, really thoroughly enjoyable. So, yeah.
Kris?
Yeah, again, echoing the other comments, education is essential. Widen your knowledge, look beyond the vanilla lenders into areas where, as a broker, you can really add value to your clients. So be that bridging, be that semi-commercial. anything that you can do that will help them expand their portfolio, and they do really rate that knowledge. But also, don't ignore opportunities. If it is a HMO or a complex company structure, then don't turn that deal away and seek assistance. You've got packages, you've got network mortgage desks, really good source of intel that can help you understand that deal and work with you and your client in order to get that placed. So really make sure you're familiar with the USPs, market your database of investors, and then reach out for that help and knowledge as and when you need it.
I know I did say I was going to ask you one last question, but I mean, just a thought from what you've all said. I mean, is there anything more that lenders can do to kind of support brokers? Jane?
Training is always great.
Yeah.
But I think the type of training that personally I like for my business and my staff is not just your standard criteria type training, but actually, can you offer a session on something like reading accounts or whatever the sticking point might be, complex limited company structures or whatever that particular lender specialises in. So not just, this is our criteria and this is what we do, but actually taking it a step further. And just, I think if you've got that better understanding of how a lender is looking at something, how they're viewing something, I think that really helps you to be able to work with your clients. So just different types of training, I think more in-depth training in certain areas.
No, that's really useful. Yeah, no, that's great. Liz, anything?
Just the contact, I really do see such a lot of benefit with my advisors who, speak regularly to lenders, because it's that contact, that continuous. You never, as an advisor, remember everything a lender can do. You go onto a sourcing system, and it will get you so far, but it won't get you any further. You've got to, as an advisor, you've got to pull everything together, from your kind of knowledge of a lender to what their website says, to what the sourcing system says, to what the market's going, and your BDM. They are really, really key in the process to helping you place cases and get familiarity with the grey areas, because in this market there's not a lot of black and white. There's a lot of, well, yeah, we'll do this or if that, or if you present it this way. And that's really where keeping those BDMs not on the road, but perhaps back on the road soon. But keeping those BDMs, providing us with that contact and that support with cases is absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And Kris, a final point from you?
I think lenders certainly in the specialist buy-to-let space are really good at educating brokers and packages. I think a lot of the material they produce is very useful. It focuses more around USPs and case studies as opposed to just criteria points. Because again, as Liz touched on, you can see 5 different cases and they're all 5 different scenarios. It's not like a vanilla buy-to-let where it can just be tick box and go through in a couple of days and be accepted. So I think having that access to BDMs, having someone that you can pick the phone to and discuss a scenario rather than just having to go online and get criteria or put it in a calculator, I think is essential.
No, that's brilliant. Well, thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate the insights today. I know I've learned a lot about the opportunities available in the buy-to-let market. I do think it's certainly a growing one, and there's a key area of focus. But for me, I think it's making sure that the clear message that I've got is all about making sure that you understand. It's all about education. So to really kind of embrace this. But yeah, thank you very, very much, everybody, for joining us today. That's sadly all we have time for today. My thanks to my fabulous expert panel. My goodness, I've just been overwhelmed and wowed by you all today, just by learning so much. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and views. Really do appreciate it. Jane, Liz, and Kris, thank you. And stay safe and well. Goodbye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.